Welcome back to another episode of Hockey Thoughts with Scott. What I want to get into and discuss today has to do with future NHL expansion. We're going to be talking about potential NHL cities to start off here. We're going to have two more episodes in this series, one with expansion to 36 teams, and then a second one with expansion to 40 teams. I think 36 and 40 teams may be too much for the NHL, but there has been discussion around future expansion, movement of franchises. So I at least want to talk about that and at least lay some of the predicate down for what it could look like if the NHL decides to go that direction. Now, with the cities and the possible expansion as well, we had talked about in the realignment video that I had done that's coming up for the 2021-22 season when Seattle comes in, how in my plan they should have realigned differently than what they're planning to. If you want to listen and get more of my thoughts on that, you should see a suggested tab right about here in a moment or two to go to that video and take a listen to that and to leave comments. If you want to see other videos that I do produce as well, please go ahead and subscribe. But let's go ahead and let's get into the cities at this point. So when we talk about the future cities, there are the potential cities. There were two cities that I had brought up as potential targets where the NHL could relocate franchises. And Arizona and Florida have always been the two cities that have been talked about for relocation. And in both of those situations, Quebec City has been the first option, and then Houston was the other city that I had talked about as a potential landing spot for a relocated franchise. I still think those are the two cities that are going to get a franchise one way or the other, whether it's through relocation or through expansion. So I'm laying that out there at this point. So if the league were to go to 34, I think Quebec City and Houston would be the cities. However, I do want to talk about some other potential landing spots, some other potential cities that may make sense for the NHL as well. So let's talk about the center, really that center of the country, with the northern edge of that circle that's just was drawn on the screen at Saskatoon, going down to just north of El Paso. You've got one team in really the center, and that's the Colorado Avalanche. Several teams on the edges. But there's not a lot of other cities that you could potentially put a franchise in. You wouldn't think. I think there's 6 areas where a franchise could potentially go. The first one is Kansas City, Missouri. They used to have the Kansas City Scouts. They had moved to Denver, became the Colorado Rockies, were there to the early 80s, and then moved to where they are now, currently in New Jersey. So that's one city that I believe could have a second crack at an NHL franchise. They also have a building ready to go. Same thing with Quebec and Houston. The next city is Salt Lake City, Utah. They've had minor league hockey in the past. They have a building that they could utilize. They have the facilities. Again, some of the facilities are going to be 20 plus years old at this point because of the Olympics, but they have the facilities that they could utilize. They have a population base, and you would have yourself a natural rival with Colorado in the Denver area. So that's a city that could be looked at. Now, the third one I want to talk about, I think, is a long shot, but it's something I do want to at least bring to the table. And that's putting a franchise in Saskatchewan. Whether it be based in Saskatoon or Regina, to me, I don't think it really makes much of a difference where the franchise would land. I think Saskatchewan, the folks in Saskatchewan would support that team regardless of where it's located. I wouldn't necessarily call them the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but I think one of those two cities could support a team. The problem here is the population size, and that could be a deterrent for the NHL to expand into Saskatchewan. Oklahoma City is another potential landing spot that had been talked about in the early 2000s, especially when you started thinking about Oklahoma City was building a building. They wanted an NBA or an AHL franchise to fill that building. They eventually got the NBA franchise when the Seattle Sonics moved to Oklahoma City. It became the Thunder. I don't think Oklahoma City is going to be highly involved in an NHL franchise, but it is a city that could potentially support a second major franchise. Now, the next two cities inside of this bubble don't have any pro sports. One of them does have the population and the corporate support that I think could make a run at it, and that's Omaha, Nebraska. They're a larger city than a lot of people think about when they think about cities in Nebraska. You're 3 hours from Kansas City. You're several hours from Minneapolis. You do have a good population base, and you do have people that do have money. Now, I'm not saying Warren Buffett would want to purchase into an NHL franchise in Omaha, but it is a potential because there are people that do have potentially the financial backing to do it in Nebraska. Now, the last city I want to talk about in the bubble does fall into the same category as Saskatchewan. That would be Boise, Idaho. Boise, Idaho doesn't have any type of professional sports. It is a college town. The population base, however, would dictate that they would not be able to support the franchise in a long-term fashion. But you never know. It's something where to keep in mind, especially if you get an ownership group that would want to bring a professional franchise into Idaho. It would be the first professional franchise in Idaho. Major professional franchise. They've had minor league hockey there before. So again, that's another potential landing spot. I think it's a very low probability, but I at least want to put it out on the table. Now, let's take this circle and those 6 cities off the map for a few moments. We're going to talk about some past WHA cities. The first past WHA city I want to talk about is Cincinnati. They had the Stingers back in the 70s during the WHA. They did not move, or they did not go into the NHL. I think it's a potential landing spot. Cincinnati has a building in the downtown core with Paul Brown Stadium, Great American Ballpark, and I think it's US Bank Arena. I apologize if I don't have that right, but they're right along the riverfront in Cincinnati. So they do have the facilities that are there. They have the population. They have the industries. They have a lot that's going for them that I think would make a lot of sense for them to have something. Now, the next city I do want to bring up here is going to be Indianapolis. Again, this is a team, a city that had the Racers. They had Wayne Gretzky. Let's keep this in mind. Wayne Gretzky was not always an Edmonton Oiler. He started in Indianapolis as a racer. So that is something to be mindful of. Again, it's a city that does have a couple pro franchises already. Not 100% sure if you could. I'm not sure if you could fit in a third major franchise in Indianapolis, but from a historical standpoint, they have had hockey in the past. They do have ECHL hockey now. It's another city that could potentially support a hockey franchise. Another city that had a WHA franchise was in Birmingham with the Birmingham Bulls. Now, I do have a little bit of a Southeast bias, especially with Atlanta having a team and both of them moving to Calgary and Winnipeg respectively. I'm not sure if there's going to be much consternation to have a pro hockey team in Birmingham, Alabama. However, this is another potential reason why I bring this out on here is one, they were a WHA franchise. The second reason is this would be the first major pro team in Alabama. Take what you want from the Alabama Crimson Tide in college football, it still would be a major professional sports franchise. So that's one. Again, it's another long shot city. I don't know if they would really want the NHL in Alabama, but again, I'm going to bring that out there as a potential. The other city that has an AHL team but doesn't have an NHL team, or also had one in the past, was Cleveland. And the Cleveland Barons. Here's the thing with Cleveland in getting another franchise in the NHL, and that circle that I drew around the Cleveland Barons logo. You have the Leafs, Sabres, Red Wings, Blue Jackets, and Penguins. All 5 of those franchises are within 4 hours driving of Cleveland. So you have a lot of teams in a compacted area. I worry about the fan support. Cleveland's a big enough city to handle it, but I do wonder about the fan support that they would have in Cleveland. You've got the 3 other major sports with the Indians, the Browns. Yes, I'm still counting the Browns as a professional sports franchise, and also the Cavaliers. So, getting that 4th franchise would put them into an exclusive company with other major cities. I just don't know if they have the population base to consume that 4th sport. Now, excuse me. Let me get into other potential landing spots. Now, one city that you guys probably are surprised I haven't brought up until this point is the Hartford Whalers returning. And yes, any excuse to play Brass Bonanza is going to be taken. Hartford, again, it's just another small city. They've had the NHL. It's moved to Carolina. There's some pros and some cons. Again, you have a small population base in Hartford, but you're really centered in between 2 of the larger population bases in the United States. So you have the northern New York market. There's a lot of people who work in New York that live in Connecticut. You have a lot of people that work in Boston that may live in Rhode Island or Western Massachusetts. Even though Hartford's a smaller city, they've got a lot, unlike some of the other smaller cities that I've already highlighted, they've got a large population base around them, and I think that the franchise could make hay. Now, the next place I want to talk about another franchise is having a second franchise in Toronto. Here's the good. They've got buildings, not just one. They have multiple buildings already, or have been planned. In Hamilton, you've got what was formerly known as the Cops Coliseum. There was a building going up in Markham. There's been talk about Kitchener, Waterloo, and putting in a building. So Toronto could absolutely support a second franchise. You're also a stone's throw away from Buffalo. Now, the conventional wisdom would say, Buffalo would block a franchise going in there. I disagree. I think it would actually be the other way around. I think it would be the Leafs trying to block a second franchise going into Toronto. I don't think the Leafs would lose any fan support. The Sabres might lose a little in a season ticket base. And that doesn't draw anything away from the play on the ice. That's a different discussion for a different day. But that is another area where I think a team is going to end up eventually. Next, Portland, Oregon. Portland was talked about a couple years ago, going back into the early 2000s when both Pittsburgh and Buffalo were going through some financial difficulties as landing spots for those franchises. They have a building, they have a population base. Do they want an NHL team? They do have a couple major franchises there already with the MLS and the NBA. Having a natural rival with Seattle and also Vancouver, I think, would help bring people out to see a team in Portland. The next place I want to talk about is the Maritimes. I'm not sure the Maritimes could do an expansion franchise, but if I were to put an expansion franchise in the Maritimes, I probably would put it in Moncton, New Brunswick, just because of it's a little bit equidistance between Halifax, Nova Scotia, St. John, New Brunswick. Again, kind of like Hartford, you have a little bit of a center point there. So again, you may not have a great population base, but putting a professional team in the Maritimes, I think the people in the Maritimes would flock to that franchise, regardless if it was in New Brunswick or Nova Scotia. Next city I want to talk about is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Again, Milwaukee, similar to Omaha in the sense that it is you don't think about it as a major big city, but they've got a baseball team. There's a football team in just north of Milwaukee in Green Bay. You've got a lot of people who do commute back and forth to Chicago. There's a lot of GE has a major healthcare facility out there, so there's a lot of there's a lot of people, there's a lot of industry, there's a lot of business that could support a team in Milwaukee. And Milwaukee had talked about getting a franchise back in the early 90s when there was a lot of expansion going on. I think they would have a building in the Fiserv Forum that does have the ability of converting to hockey. It's currently used for the NBA Milwaukee Bucks. A couple other cities I do want to talk about here before we wrap up this video. Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte, North Carolina is still growing by leaps and bounds. They have a lot of banking industries down in Charlotte. Population is actually bigger than Atlanta. It's a city that I believe could absolutely support another franchise. They have the NBA and also the NFL. I think a third franchise in the NHL would be supported without issue. You have a natural rival with the team based in Raleigh and the Carolina Hurricanes. I think it's a win-win there. Another city that's growing by leaps and bounds that does not have any type of pro franchise is Austin, Texas. Now, I also circled San Antonio, Texas on the map because San Antonio does have a very large population base as well. So really, we're looking at that central Texas, the two cities in central Texas. They're separated by about an hour. Austin's been traditionally a college football town. San Antonio has the Spurs. But Austin has a population base of nearly 1 million people in it. So there's a lot of people in Austin. And it's an untapped market for a pro sports franchise. I think Austin is going to be slowly looked at by other sports as a potential landing spot. And just like Vegas, when the Golden Knights became the first franchise in Las Vegas, the first franchise in Austin, the first major franchise in Austin, could get a boost from being there. And we have one more city to talk about, and that's going to be Atlanta. Wait a minute. No, we're not going there. Forget it. So we've talked about 20 cities at this point that could potentially get an NHL franchise. Obviously, if we're going to be expanding to 36 or 40, not all of these cities are going to be realistic. Going to get a franchise. But I wanted to bring out a number of these cities to point out some of the pros, some of the cons on what can be done. So in the next video, we're going to talk about what the NHL would look like as a 36-team league. We're going to get into where the teams would be located. We're going to get into the regular season format. We would get into playoff formatting as well. And then the third video would be on the expansion, the 40. So if you like this video, go ahead and please subscribe. Go ahead and hit the thumbs up for liking this video. Hit the bell so you get notified when the next videos do come out as well. I thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.